I recently put out an album called Forget the Cost, and I've been telling everybody it's a bedroom pop record because it was inspired by other songs in the genre. It's got that certain lo-fi, low-budget quality, but more importantly, I made it in my bedroom. I can personally verify that much, but it got me thinking, how can I really embody the genre of bedroom music? How can I embed my room in the sonic footprint of my music? Using room mics is a technique that's been used since the dawn of recording. A room microphone is generally placed further from the source of the sound. They're intended to capture the reflections and reverberations of a sound existing in a real space. While most professional studios have sonic treatment on the walls and the roof, the corners, to try and make it so that you're capturing sound as accurately as possible, regardless of the space that it's in, my room definitely doesn't have that. I have these little panels on the wall behind me just because that's the direction my speakers face, and I don't want to have as much direct reflection, but the rest of my room is totally unproofed. And frankly, music sounds quite good in my room just for listening and whatnot. So I thought, how can I capture that? How can I inject what I'm hearing in my ears, in my room, into the mix when other people hear it? So with a few creative techniques on my new track, Kick and Scream, I did this and literally injected the bedroom into bedroom pop.
If you want to listen to Kick and Scream, I've got the music video on my channel, but you can also stream it on all major streaming services. Link will be in the description.
So here's a demonstration of how I captured these ambient recordings. The first setup I tried involved setting up 2 microphones in the center of my room, and I used a Bluetooth speaker as the sound source. I wasn't too concerned with getting a steady, accurate sound here. I just wanted to add some room and variation in the output. I used my main microphone on a mic stand on the left there, this little Bluetooth speaker, and I used my phone for the other microphone just on the voice memo app. My phone has a fairly high audio quality recording for the phone, but with this type of genre, I'm not too concerned about the sound quality. I sent my computer audio through the Bluetooth speaker and just played the entire track from start to finish. I held the speaker in my hand and moved it around the space between the 2 microphones in a fairly random fashion. Most Bluetooth speakers don't sound the same from all listening angles. They'll usually sound good from one side and quieter from others, but you can use this to your advantage and experiment with the angle you hold the speaker at. I tried facing the speaker at the wall, at the ceiling, and at my bed, and they will all reflect the sound differently. I would recommend monitoring the microphone through a pair of headphones before or during this process so you can hear what you're doing. It's certainly worth testing out different mic placements and seeing which will sound the most aesthetic for your room, your song, and subsequently get you the best recording. For my second setup, I placed the Bluetooth speaker on my vinyl turntable and placed the 2 microphones on either side of that. I put my phone on the keyboard there and the microphone closer to the TV unit. I find it's useful to imagine how the sound waves will bounce around from the speaker, especially when the source or microphone are near reflective surfaces, such in this case. You could obviously try to avoid this, but there's something kind of cool and candid about the way things exist already in a room not intended for recording purposes. There will be a lot of reflections coming directly from the wall in this case, as well as some from the TV unit. I've got the speaker spinning on the turntable, so this gives the output a sort of slow tremolo or Leslie effect that was used in a lot of old vintage organs. Having the microphones placed on either side of the setup will give a cool stereo effect when we pan them left and right in the mix, since it's kind of the opposite to how our ears sit in relation to the sounds around us. It's like having your ears spread further apart with all of the sounds originating in the center between them. I experimented with changing the turntable speed at different points in the song, and luckily the buttons on the turntable were pretty much silent, so I didn't have to worry about the mechanical noise. Although in hindsight that also could have been an interesting effect. Playing with the speaker orientation on the turntable itself will also lead to different results, so that was worth playing with. Here's an example of a static setup which I didn't use for this mix, but I'd be interested to try it out in the future. I think it's fun to find different spaces in your room which will have unique reverberation patterns to them, just seeing what different parts of your room sound like that you might not have thought of before. Experimentation is key, really. Finally, I'll show you the very first technique that I used in this song, which was playing the song through my main speakers on my desk and walking from the furthest point in the room by the door over towards a spot right in front of the speakers. I did this while the intro was playing to give the illusion of the listener walking over towards the song. I ended up just mixing this into the intro rather than using it solely as the intro itself, just because I wanted a little more clarity than the recording offered. However, it provided a lot of warmth and space to the mix that I personally feel makes the intro very cozy and inviting. Okay, now let's look at how we can take those recordings and mix them into our song. So for the first recording here, I put each of the 2 recordings. I got the microphone that was on the stand and my phone in 2 separate channels in one group container so that I could control the volume of that overall recording in one place. I EQ'd each of those a little bit differently just so that I could even them out a little bit. And I put a multiband compressor on each of them just to level out the overall frequency response of the 2 recordings. I'll just turn off the overall volume adjustments. Together they sound like this. So as you can see here on the phone recording, I actually did a bit of a sidechain EQ effect here. And this is something that's built into Pro Q3, so don't worry if you don't have that. It's not super important, but it's just a little technique to match the EQ curve of 2 different channels. So what I did with this utility here is this is basically my overall volume control for the entire thing. So if I bring up the automation here, we can see that I'm slowly fading it in during the intro from -4.5 dB up to 0. The verse has the full thing, and then the chorus, it totally ducks out. And that's when I switch it over to this one up here, which is the turntable where the microphone was spinning around. I just did that because I wanted the chorus to have a little bit more uniformity to it, add a little bit more even motion, and that was what the turntable recording sounded like it had if I just solo that. Something about it gives it a bit of a retro, tremolo, almost like a phaser flanger feel to it. Just kind of changes the EQ curve of each of the speakers in a nice cyclic fashion. And that's just a result of the recording technique that we used. So I had that in for the chorus and I basically alternated between the 2. Speaking of the turntable recordings, you can see here that I've done the same effect. I've just taken the phone recording and applied an EQ curve to make it match the other one, and that balances them out nicely. So without that EQ, it would sound like this. It kind of makes it a little bit more lopsided without it, so I just brought it on so it sounds like they're very evenly reaching both of the same peaks and valleys in the frequency response each time it goes through that cycle. If we listen to the transition point from one microphone recording to the next, such as from the verse to the chorus, we'll see how that sounds. So you can hear that, I think just because the microphones were a bit closer to the speaker at that point, there's more of a bass response, and that's also to do with the fact that the speaker was closer to a wall. You're getting a lot more of those low-end reflections happening, and so that's another reason why I wanted to use that turntable one in the chorus. Now, the part of the song where I used these effects most intensely and they were most prominent in the mix was at the start of the verse, because if you listen here, I actually cut out a lot of the other instruments. This was a later decision in the songwriting process. I used to have all of these instruments turned on for the start bit, but I eventually realized that if I just soloed the room mics and had the vocal playing over top of that, it sounded like it was in my room because it was in my room. So I opted to leave it like that for this. So I'll just play that for you. And it's burning me down. So I've just got this one keyboard playing the melody as well as the vocals. All that's left after that is the room mics. So you can see here for the fourth bar of the verse, I just cut out all of these ambient recordings just so that there was a bit of a moment of just the a cappella at that point. And then it all comes back in. All of the other instruments are coming in at the same time. And they're still being layered with the ambient room recording, but it has a nice impact. So you can hear how that sounds. There's a fire, and it's burning me down. We basically just have these two recordings for each position. They're balanced in relation to one another, and then they come in and out at different parts in the track depending on how we want them to work. I have them panned so that you have that really wide stereo effect and they don't muddy up the center of the mix. They're just there to provide a little bit of width, a bit of warmth. And speaking of warmth, let's talk about the little recording of me walking from my doorway into my seat here in front of my speakers just for the intro. I just did this with a single stereo recording with my phone. I have the Galaxy S10, so it's got two microphones on either end of the phone, and so you're able to record in stereo. But if your phone doesn't do that, I'd recommend getting like a Zoom microphone. Having something in stereo is a good substitute for using two separate microphones. You can literally see the waveform fading up as I come closer to the speakers. And I think around this stage is where I was basically in front of the speakers. This recording sounds like this. There's a few things to note here. I've got this really heavy EQ on it. It's got a lot of those boomy, boxy frequencies. So I used a dynamic EQ to remove those, boosted some of the highs. If you listen to this, particularly from here to here, it's where I got to my desk and I don't remember specifically what happened, but you can distinctly hear like something sliding. It might be like my placemat just sliding along. And that is very much audible in the final mix. Just that little tss. Now, I did hear that when I recorded it and I considered like, oh, maybe I should go back and get a cleaner take of it. But like I said before when I was talking about the mechanical noise from the buttons on the turntable, it's not always a bad thing to have these little imperfections in your recordings. Particularly if they're not messing with the dynamics. I'm not really doing any compression on this. I'm not doing anything that it's dependent on having a really clean signal, and just having that little extra thing, it makes it feel a lot more organic and a lot more human. Because we're going for a lo-fi sound here, just having room noises, I mean, that wasn't intended as part of the music and I wasn't trying to do it, you know, in time with the music or something. It just makes it sound a little bit more like I'm just recording a demo. You know, if you're going for pop music, if you're trying to make something that's a lot cleaner, a lot more perfect, then that might not be for you. But personally, I love those little imperfections in recordings. I think at some point you can hear me placing my phone on the desk. Like it does a little like... I was trying to do it really softly, but you can still kind of hear it. Same principle with that. At the end here, I think there was a sound that I felt like was detracting from it all. Let's see what that was. Yeah, I knocked something. As much as that falls into the same principle, I felt like it was a little bit distracting because it was so transient and so loud. So I faded that out in the end. That brings me to the end of how I used my ambient room recordings in my mix and how you can too. I think this is a really fantastic technique because it's basically guaranteed to sound slightly unique depending on the room, the microphone, the recording you use, the choice of where in your room that you do this. Like if I had have done it, I don't know why, but I've been looking over at the corner where I've got all of my drawings on the wall. I feel like there would be an interesting interaction with all of those because, you know, they're slightly at a different angle to the wall, and I don't know. These are the things we got to experiment with. Open up the closet, maybe record near the closet and then you're not getting any reflections from that because all of the sound waves are being absorbed by the clothes. If you did it near a window, you would hear a lot more of a frequency response from the high end because of the reflection. There's a lot to study there. I'm not an expert really, but I kind of know the basic physics of how sound waves bounce. It's definitely worth looking into. Anyway, that brings me to the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I hope that I can explore this a lot more in the future and incorporate more of these techniques into my music, bring them to you guys, and see where we go with this. I have been in my room, and I will be tomorrow. See you next Friday.